Today's talk is on teaching human-computer interaction, putting emphasis on social implications, social good. And this is a personal reflection and an account of my work in the last 30 years in this field. I'm passionate about teaching human-computer interaction. I received this invitation to give a talk in this conference, and I thought for a minute, should I talk about my research, some various areas I've been involved over the years, and I decided that it's probably more interesting to give an account on the position of human-computer interaction in the curricula, in teaching in various disciplines, and the social relevance of our field. Now, before I start, I would like to contribute to this historic account we had by Professor Avouris this morning and yesterday, Maria Rusu, on various, and it's interesting that we start having history, which means we grow. And I'll bring to your attention a personal, let's say, account and a personal failure, let's say, which relates to a little bit earlier than the dates that Professor Avouris referred to. It's exactly 20 years this week that we had in Greece, in Patras, the first human-computer interaction Pan-Hellenic International Conference. I still have in my bookshelves the volume of the proceedings of that conference, and I consider it was a very successful conference. Hundreds of papers, many hundred people attended from around the world, but I consider it a personal failure because I was hoping that this would start a series of conferences on this subject in Greece, and actually we've been discussing with colleagues across Mediterranean countries of setting up a Mediterranean CHI conference, which would take place in different countries and discuss with Spain, Italy, etc. It took 20 years really to have an event. Many things happen, which we've heard from very previous speakers, and Professor Avouris and Maria Rusu are key figures in revitalizing this dream and making it true. And I'm so happy now that we have the CHI Greece conference this year, which is a so interesting event. And I just hope, and I'm sure this time it wouldn't take 20 years until the next conference. Now we have a community, very vibrant, with many members. Most Greek universities have research groups and labs in this area, and it's really a different world, 2021 than 2001. Okay, let's go now to the main topic of today's talk, now, which relates to teaching human-computer interaction. And my statement in this talk would be that human-computer interaction as a course has changed. Its relevance, its position is recognized in a different way these days than it used to be, which means that this brings a new responsibility, a new definition of the role of the HCI educator. So I'm looking into the future, as Costa said, and I try to think what this responsibility would be and what is the new role of people who are taking this role of teaching human-computer interaction. Now, I'll start with some observations, and then I'll report on some research I did in preparing this talk. Now, we all know that HCI is what we call a boundary field. is a multidisciplinary field that draws its methods, its tool, its inspiration from various disciplines, which on their own right, they're full areas of research and study. Now we've been in the center of subjects like computer science, cognitive psychology, design, ergonomics, etc. And what we need to do is to bring this multidisciplinarity, this perspective into the curriculum in the context in which we teach the subject of human-computer interaction. Myself, I'm a part of a hard science program of study and department. I teach in a department of electrical and computer engineering. So I'm around me, next door in here where I am right now, there are labs on hardware, on software engineering, on various aspects of even electrical engineering, etc. So I have to bring this human-computer interaction multidisciplinarity into this context. I know a lot of other colleagues and participating also in this conference, they teach in a different context, human-computer interaction as a field or whatever name it has, interactive design, etc., is embedded in other programs of study, like in communication studies, in information science, in psychology, etc. Whatever the context, we still remain a subject of a high degree of interdisciplinarity. And this makes us unique. And that I'll come back to this in relation to their role, which is also evolving. Now, I had the feeling, just the general feeling that as I grow and progress in my teaching and research role these last 30 years in the University of Patras, but overall, that this field seems to change. It's more the human perspective or the user-centered perspective is increasing in importance. And I wanted to confirm this. This was just my feeling. I wasn't sure whether I can back this feeling by bringing some evidence. So I did a little bit of research, and what I decided to do is to have a look into the body of knowledge of computer science. Now, the rest of this talk would make reference to computing and computer science, because that's the context I'm more aware of. But perhaps some of these observations are relevant in other fields of study. Now, I had a look in two documents. One is the Computer Science Curricula 2013, which is produced by a very important joint task force of ACM and IEEE Computer Society. So these two very important, very international societies of our field put together their efforts, and they've worked for many years now in producing these reports, these recommendations, how we should organize studies in computing. Now, I looked very carefully in the reference they make to human-computer interaction in these two reports. The red one you see here, the 2020, is the most recent one issued. And I tried to see the differences. So to see what this evolution, this feeling of increased importance of human-computer interaction, to see whether it's reflected in these computer science curricular reports. Now, starting from the 2013 computer science curriculum recommendation, there it identifies what is called the 18 knowledge areas of computer science. And one of the 18 knowledge areas, the core computer science, which means basically that a program in computer science should have make reference through courses and activities to these areas, is human-computer interaction. So we are a core subject of computer science. Good. Now, if we move on, there is also a recommendation of core hours as described in more technically in the curriculum. And I've discovered there that from the 300 or just over 300 hours, which I take it as a recommendation for equivalent to the, let's say, 300 credits in a program, 8 hours should be dedicated to human-computer interaction. So we are about 2.6% of the core hours of that we dedicate in our programs. Okay, that's very good. And I reflected a little bit on my own experience. I'll just give you we run here an engineering program, a 5 years engineering program, and we have is the equivalent of the program of 300 credits, CCPS. And the subjects on human-computer interaction, which I'm myself directly involved with, are about right. I mean, it's a course which is called Interaction Technology, Interactive Technologies, which is 5 credits, and we have another course on web programming, which includes some modules in design, which is another 5. So we are about, let's say, about 6 to 8 credits. So we are about, according to the recommendation, we seem to follow the recommendation. I don't know what's happening in other universities in Greece, but it's interesting to compare the programs and see whether we follow this recommendation. Now, looking into this a bit further on, we would like to see how the curriculum describes our field. So the statement there is that HCI is concerned with designing interactions between human activities and computational systems that support them, and with building interface, constructing interface to afford those interactions. So design and development of interactive systems is the key learning objectives of this. Now, there is more further, I don't want to burden you further with this, but it's a description of recommended courses, and there are 2 recommended core courses, one on design and the other one more practical on methods and tools. A keyword I would like to refer to is the acknowledgement of the curriculum report, the recommendation of 2013, that HCI Foundations course should bring to the attention of the students a different repertoire of techniques, as it's called, to address human-centered interaction and design, different than what is provided elsewhere in the curriculum. This is an interesting word, and I come back to this notion because it acknowledges the different perspective that we bring, our subject brings in the overall context of the curriculum. Now, I looked further in the most recent edition of the 2020 and tried to look at differences and see how different the perspective is. Now, there are some notable differences which we should take into account. I should say that in universities take a bit longer to take up all these recommendations and include them in their way of organizing their studies. So I expect most of our programs are more based on the 2013 recommendation rather than the more recent one. So it's interesting to look at it more carefully. Now, the 2020 computing curriculum describes 34 knowledge areas organized in 6 ordered categories, which are down here. Now you see that they're ordered, and the first category is users and organization. So the users have been now at the front line. This is the top priority of the program, while software and hardware, which are more traditional subjects of computing, are further down. Now, and within users and organization, there are very interesting subject knowledge areas, as they're called, like user experience design, etc. Now, if we look further, which is something very interesting we should reflect, and I'll discuss it further on, is that there is a new perspective in the recommendation, and this is related to what is called the notion of competencies. Now, it's a competencies-based recommendation. It's clearly this is a new way of looking in programs of study. Now, in the US, probably it's something new, but in Europe, we discussed the notion of competencies for quite a while now. There is the European Parliament and European Commission documents relating and describing, they're making reference to knowledge, skills, and competencies and the difference between these three. And we have been receiving directives for organizing learning objectives and describing programs of study along these lines. But in the curriculum recommendation of ACM IEEE, this is the first time this is brought to our attention. Now, knowledge, we all understand, and that's my understanding of it, is more theory, it's more description, and it's mostly related to lecturing. Now, skills is more practical, ability to apply this knowledge. And I relate it very much to practical work we do with our students, like lab work, drills and exercises. While competence is described, and I've taken this definition by this document of the European Parliament relating to lifelong learning, is a proven ability to use knowledge and skills, and as well as personal, social, and all methodological abilities, attitudes, etc., in work or study situations. So it's a more situated, proven ability to apply knowledge and skills that are acquired. And I relate it to my own understanding of these notions to project work, where large-scale projects that we should include in our teaching, and this should become a very important aspect, according to this new recommendation, in a way of organizing our studies. Now, if I want to go further and look at the competencies in the curriculum, it goes a good direction. It's a very good document. I really recommend everybody to have a look at, involved with teaching and in academia in these subjects. And it describes the competencies that are expected from somebody who completes studies in computing. And describes that the 84 examples of competencies are the recommendation. Now, guess what? Out of these 84, 5 competencies are related to HCI. So you see the increase is from the 2% of the total core of the curriculum now moved to the 6% of the competencies, which is the new measure of success of a program, of the way of organizing the program. And it's interesting also to look at this recommendation of competencies. I have a brief description of them. There are long documents in the recommendation. The first one says that the students should be able to design an interactive application by applying a user-centered design method, a cycle, within a corporate environment. You see the social relevance. So they don't talk about a toy problem, but a real corporate environment, work environment, where they should be able to design an interactive application. And the second competence they should prove is to be able to analyze and evaluate a user interface, taking into consideration various theoretical notions here: universal access, inclusiveness, assistive technologies, and cultural sensitive design. And along the same lines are all 5 of these competencies that a program should include and should, through them, prove that it's achieved its objectives. Like, for example, the third competence is design and develop a smaller scale interactive application, but look at the social relevance of it for a local charity, bringing into discussion social good clearly and relation to local communities. And again, create and conduct a usability test. So plan and execute a usability test, taking into consideration universal access and culturally sensitive design. Finally, create a simple application for an enterprise. So it's building an application now and conduct a quantitative evaluation and report the results. So these seem to be, first of all, socially relevant, relating to real life, to outside the academia situations, but complete projects with relating to skills and knowledge of our discipline. Now, the final conclusion of this short study I've conducted preparing this talk is that it's clearly that the human-computer interaction is moving towards the central stage, it becomes more relevant. But also the recommendation, the most recent recommendation, bring to our attention a new way of teaching, a new way of working with our students. So I come, and this is the second part of the talk, I come to think and reflect what is the implication for the HCI educator given this observation. And I've identified 3 relevant tasks, which I'm going to elaborate further in the following. First, that we should decide on how to organize project work with our students, which becomes very important given this new way of thinking. And in particular, how to make their work socially relevant, which has a wider implication for their self-esteem and the way they understand themselves as professionals in the future. The second task of the HCI educator is they has to infuse a human-centered perspective in a wider spectrum of areas of study within the curriculum. So go beyond our own disciplinary courses and discuss with colleagues in other areas of study. And third, to contribute in development of professional responsibilities and ethics, which is a very important topic in these days. Now, I'm going to elaborate in these 3 new tasks, new requirements for the HCI educator, starting from the way or some reflection or the work we're going to be doing, we need to do in relation to project-based learning. Now, I should start from the beginning saying that we are a discipline, and I know from my own experience, but also the work a lot of our colleagues doing throughout our country and around the world, that we do follow a project-based approach in design courses or in HCI courses already. Now, the new thing we have to consider is the social aspect and the social implication. And I would bring into your attention some thoughts relating to this. Now, this makes a reference to my own personal experience working with project-based approaches throughout the years, but also from the literature. And by the way, this talk is, I've contributed a short paper, which you can find in the proceedings of our conference, especially to make a reference to the literature I used in preparing it. Now, Buckley et al. Have written a very good paper on socially relevant computing, which they discuss some of these ideas I'm describing here relating to project work. Now, an observation of Buckley is that our students present 2 contradictory sides. What they describe them is the small s and the capital S side of our student. Now, which is part of, I think it's being young and looking into the world from different perspectives. Now, the little s, the solipsistic or the egoistic point of view, is that reflect on their own personal interest, and they look at the world and trying to work on them. And that relates to the projects. Very often a student would come and say, would I discuss with them on their project work, and they say, oh, I'm a gamer and I like gaming and I would like to design a new game, which is fair enough, it's good. Now, there's also another perspective young people have, and our students definitely do, is the capital S, the socially relevant view, this altruistic view as described by this, by Buckley et al. And they want to contribute to the social good, to contribute to the society overall. Now, which one of these perspectives should be used in a project work in the context of an interactive design course or work we're doing with them? I think that this is a point that we should negotiate. First of all, it's very important that they keep ownership of their work. So we shouldn't say no, think big, think about the societal issues. I think it's we need to go into a negotiation and say, just take the example of the student who comes and says, I would like to design a game. I say, okay, that's very good. It's an interesting area, and it's hard one, very challenging. But think of a game which relates to a social issue of wider implications. I don't know, about refugee crisis, about poverty, learning, etc. And this is something that the HCI educator should reflect. I've put together some ideas on, these are more relating to my experience as teacher, on how to work on project work in human-computer interaction. Now, a pattern I have used over the years, sometimes, and there are different patterns on this, is to start from an existing service and product, which situates the project in the real world, and ask the students to evaluate the usability and measure the user experience, and then go further and following the usability and user experience study, recommend redesign. So it has to be based on a real existing service or product. Now, we strive to achieve strong societal relevance related to a local problem, local community, or our country's services, or a global issue, even more to the point. Now, it's very important for the students to work in groups. They're not individual projects. No designers like working together, but this is because they have to learn to collaborate, to negotiate, to organize themselves in achieving their objectives. And this gives them also agency over their work, because they decide on the plan, they decide on the roles, and they have to report back on these issues. Now, ownership is very important here, and that reflects to the competencies discussion we had in the curriculum. For this reason, the approach they should take should not be fully prescribed. It is no point just give them a list of excuse me, a list of tasks. Do this and then do this and then do that. We give them a tool set and say, these are all the methods. We've done those during the course, the theoretical lectures, and you decide how you're going to proceed. So it's their own project. They decide on which way to conduct their work, and how to report, how to organize their activities. Fifth point, it relates to dissemination, and publicly announcing their work. They should communicate the results. They should be proud of what they've done, and that will demonstrate also the contribution to a wider audience and a wider set of a broader group of people. I'll give you an example of this in a minute. An inspiration for project ideas, I find it very interesting, and I haven't used myself, but I've heard a lot of stories about the relevance of this. Is this United Nations decision of 2015 on Sustainable Development Goals? There are 17 goals of very high level, like poverty, hunger, well-being, education, gender equality, etc. But more to the point are the related metrics. So there are ways of measuring and achieving these objectives, and related to them are the ideas for projects. So perhaps an educator can refer to this body of knowledge and ideas, and I think many HCI educators have done that. Now, I'll give you some examples from, one is from our own experience and another one from the literature. In a couple of years ago, in the context of our course, we've focused on digital government services, on e-government. And following the pattern I've discussed earlier on, we asked the students in groups to evaluate and redesign e-government websites. So they've done really interesting work, and some of it was also reported in the Usability Observatory. This is Παρατηρητήριο Χριστίας that George Karidakis has been referring to throughout this conference. So if you look into it, you will find some of the work of those students that, in this example, is climatologio, cadastral services. That was very insightful, the work. They've discovered lots of shortcomings of the design, and they made very valuable recommendations of improving. So you understand that this, by working in such a project, the students felt that they're very important. They contribute to the society. They try to improve the life of their fellow citizens. Now, and a slightly different perspective is the one reported by Buckley et al. Of the University of Buffalo projects, where they contacted a local Center for Handicapped Children's Learning unit, and they asked the students to go there, talk to the kids, which are kids with some of them with severe impairments, motor, visual, or audio impairments, and together they designed an augmented communication device, and they were lucky first to design and then to even develop that with collaborating with another group of students, which were on hardware and software design. And then test this, and this is an example of the project with the kids of this center. So this is a different approach, but it's very socially relevant in that respect. So this is the first point I was trying to make, is that the importance of this project work and the ideas we have to bring into the perspective of HCI educator in organizing this project work and making it socially relevant. Now, the second point is relating to infusion of human-centered perspective in the curriculum overall. So we transcend the boundaries of our discipline, and we negotiate and discuss with colleagues in other areas of study. I'm referring here, obviously, to computing, but one can reflect on if you are in a different context and on your own context. Now, I've looked into from the literature, but also from our own experience and some of our own research, by the way, the relations of human-computer interaction on one hand, and some other key areas of study, which is notable, very important ones, all three of them, software engineering, artificial intelligence, and security. Now, by looking and trying to find common ground and space to introduce and negotiate the perspective by bringing user into the discussion, I looked into the software engineering field, and I've looked in particular into the human-centered agile software development approaches, the human-centered AI in relation to artificial intelligence, and usable security in relation to the field of security. Now, for each one of them, I'll just give an account of, brief account of some ideas relating to them. Now, if we discuss the relationship between human-computer interaction and software engineering, I should say that there is a traditional tension between these two fields. I think there's a contradiction, and I think one of the reasons that the curriculum is been talking about alternative repertoire of techniques that HCI should bring, I think it was a major reference to the distinction between the approach of software engineering in developing products, even interactive systems, and the human-computer interaction approach, the user-centered design mindset. Now, the first one was more formal, is more product technology oriented. The second one is more versatile and is more flexible, and it really makes a strong reference to the user, to the human. Now, is there a common ground? Can you negotiate with the software colleagues in the software engineering field? I think yes, and there is a lot of research and practice in this field. One very interesting area, which I'd like to make a reference to, and I recommend this Alistair Cockburn book on Agile software development, is these approaches relating to Agile software development, which are very much practiced, by the way. They're very relevant in the industry, and they should be reflected more and more in the curriculum in the software engineering courses, which mostly follow a more traditional approach, from my understanding. Now, Agile software development does put emphasis on people and their creativity relating to the designers and developers' creativity, but also is much more flexible. So there is a step closer to our way of thinking, but it's even more work in this direction. And I was looking in the literature recently, and this Brel et al. Have done a literature survey in the area of what's called user-centered agile software development, and they go further into introducing user-centered approaches, very many of those very familiar to us in the agile software development lifecycle. So that I think there is a very interesting common ground here, and we should put more emphasis and negotiate introduction of this common ground, which brings much closer the fields of human-computer interaction and software engineering. Now, the second example I want to bring is the artificial intelligence discipline, which has gained a lot of prominence, especially in recent years. And if I may refer to this, it's a sister discipline to HCI. HCI and AI have been going together. We've been using AI techniques in our world. They're very strongly related, our two fields. We have been building adaptable intelligent interfaces, adaptive systems. We've been using a natural language approach in our interaction, etc. Now, the field has grown in importance. I was very interested in last night's some of the talks by the very, very interesting session relating to industrial partners who reported their work. For those of you who assisted, who participated in that and listened to the discussion, I remember, and I'm relating to what we discuss here, the report of one of the leading software houses in the shipping industry, which they do follow user-centered design or redesign of their products, their software. And it was interesting for me to that the presenter reported on the user requirements. And the top of the list, the users were asking, "We want more AI." Now, what does this mean? I mean, it's in the mass media, AI means more automation. Basically, it's not a technical term. It means that the machine should do more. It should take more of the burden of the users to automate things. Now, this is okay, but what is the point of view of us HCI people in reference to this avalanche of and the high demand for AI techniques, especially in the new trend, new direction of AI relating mostly to machine learning, which is got a very strong emphasis on a kind of black box because it's data driven. Now, a book that I really make reference to and recommend is by Cathy O'Neill on weapons of mass destruction. Actually, I've got it here on my desk, and I very often refer to it. Now, the examples given in this book are all from various application areas where AI or statistics or data-driven approaches for automation can be disastrous. I mean, they can, and there are very serious ethical implications on these approaches. Take in consideration, so there are some of the examples of in Cathy O'Neill's book, using AI techniques for deciding whether somebody would in a court for taking a decision whether somebody should go in jail or not, or somebody would or related to financial issues, a bank deciding whether it should be allowed to take a loan, etc. Now, these approaches very often have bias, they're not fair, and they're not, they have no associated explanation on this. And this is the human perspective and criticism we should exercise on AI in this aspect is a very important request of and a very important point of view that we believe HCI should bring into this discussion. Now, I'll make a reference to what I consider very interesting conceptualization of the issue of human AI. And this makes a reference to Ben Shneiderman, this famous colleague of ours who is working, and I've been following his work and participating in some of his talks on in the area of human AI, as he calls it. And is actually working, and he's announced this new book, which is coming out in early 2022, called HumanCentered AI. No, so I'll describe a little bit the concept, and I give some examples. Now, Ben Snyderman says that if we can define a two-dimensional space, which has one dimension is computer automation, and the other one is computer control. And computer automation, or AI, let's call it, can go from low to high, and we're moving this direction to the right, while we should be very careful to maintain human control in this. And I give you an example which I illustrate, even if the example is from Ben Snyderman's talk. Now, let's take a wheelchair. And if we move into this area of low human control and low computer automation, we have an old-fashioned pushchair. Actually, I've taken this picture from a site called The History of Wheelchairs. And this is supposed to be the first wheelchair, 17th century. No human control, somebody has to push the chair, just has wheels. So low automation, low human control. And then we moved to the direction of increasing automation, and we have more modern wheelchairs, where people use to play sports and play basketball, play tennis in the Paralympics, and they can guide themselves very quickly, very easily, so, but no automation. And now we have to move in the AI times. Today, we have to invest in building new kinds of wheelchairs. And one direction we can take is like this example of a wheelchair, which is a robotic wheelchair. You just give an instruction, take me there, and the wheelchair navigates you to your destination. It's a self-driving robotic wheelchair, which is built as a prototype to be used in hospitals, in big airports, etc. Now, the argument here is that instead of going to the direction of C, we should argue for more to the direction of D, which would be high automation, a lot of AI, but also human control. We need joysticks, we need ways, even people with high impairment, to be able to communicate and navigate this piece of equipment. And this is a good example of how we should contribute to the discussion of AI the way it should go. And similar examples I give you from robotics. There is a lot of science fiction and literature, and a lot of research in various directions that robotics would take. The one is the social robots, which sounds an awful idea. I mean, to have a robot to discuss in the morning over breakfast, it's a possible direction. The other one would be have robots as super tools, as they're called. Now, the example of the Da Vinci surgery system is, we call it robotic surgery, but in real life, it's a very sophisticated, with lots of AI and a lot of automation, but is a tool for a capable surgeon to act and help the person do the surgery. This is an interesting example from for our conference, was in relating to robotics, was an interesting talk by the group from Ionian University on teaching robotics. And it was interesting there that they introduced the notion that they would be driven by humans, the robots they were suggesting in their paper. Now, similar other ideas you find in navigation. There's a lot of discussion of self-driving cars or driverless cars, and there's a lot of research and a lot of investment by the community, by our community. I believe, and I think a lot of other people in the HCI world, they believe that there are serious faults in this way of working. We do need safer cars, we do need automation in the cars, but we should maintain user control, among other things, because the user is the only agent in this context that has responsibility. The computer has no responsibility. An example from our own experiences I'll give you here is the the current way that Google Maps produce a navigation recommendation, which is very, it gives freedom for the user. If I want to drive from Patras to Volos, the Google Maps gives me 3 routes, and each one of them is has its drawbacks or merits. And this is a recommendation that gives me control to decide which one I should take. And this, if we project it into the future, it should relate also to other aspects of what I would like, and what are the merits, which is faster, which is more scenic, which is easier to drive, etc. Now, in relation to the autonomous and intelligent systems, and the concern that exists already in our community and the society, and this is a high contribution that we should, I think, as HCI people contribute, is the IEEE report on ethically aligned design, which encourages technologies to prioritize ethical consideration in relation to autonomous intelligent systems. This is a very, very important document, and I think HCI community should maintain its role in this. Now, the third item in the curriculum that I suggest, and I reflect on possible contribution and infusion of ideas to bring closer the HCI field with this discipline, is security. Security is very important. ACM IEEE curriculum has been recognizing the increased importance of security, and its common ground between security and human-computer interaction is limited. While we observed that with AI and software engineering, we did have a lot of commonalities, here is less. But yet there is a ground for discussion and an infusion of HCI ideas. Now, if you look into a typical example that affects the user is user authentication. Now, look into this conflict between the user and the security perspectives related to authentication. The user, the authentication task is secondary, is a nuisance, is a burden. Tries to try to find shortcuts, easy to remember passwords, or use the same password again and again, which creates insecure, which is insecure behavior. Now, the systems perspective don't take into account these user problems. They just want to protect their services, and they push the security problem to the user. So here there is ground for what is called usable security field to take these two contradicting perspectives and find mechanisms, systems, policies of authentication that which are usable and without weakening its security, taking into consideration security concerns. So there is usable security, a very interesting ground, which we think it should be part of the security courses. I don't think very much is included in, because there are hard science, a lot of algorithms, etc. in security discipline and courses. But the user perspective over the security issues, I think it should be increased, and it's part of our responsibility as HCI educators to bring this to the attention of our colleagues in the security field and the research in this field. So there are, we've been doing with my colleague Christos Fidas in our lab, been doing some work in this area, and it's a very fascinating area, because you have to negotiate the contradicting, these two contradicting perspectives, and find a solution which is mutually acceptable. And the example of this direction would be graphical passwords, which could be easy to remember, and then without jeopardizing the strength of the passwords used. Or another very interesting direction is the kind et al. Usability and security analysis and evaluation, where they define what's called a threat model, looked from two different perspectives, that of usability and security. This concludes the second task we believe the HCI educator should take, which is to negotiate user perspective and user interest in various disciplines in the curriculum. The third and the final point I would like to make, it's relating to professional responsibility and ethics. Now, this is a very important aspect beyond our own field, because computing plays such an important role in today's society. I like this reference to Moshe Vardis from Rice University online interview in this blog, where Vardis said that we are requested to run the society, computer scientists, and we are poorly equipped for this. We don't know how to do it. This is really a very high responsibility, and I wonder how much our students, as they graduate from programs of study in computing, are aware of this responsibility, are aware that the few lines of code that they write or an application they design can affect so seriously wider societal issues, as well as every individual user's life, health, property, etc. This is really the ethical aspect of this, and the professional responsibility that should be at least aware of is a very important issue. Now, how we address this very important problem. Now, I looked into the ACM Curriculum Report in relation to ethics, and there is recommending two different approaches. One is to include in the course a dedicated course on ethics and professional responsibility. And the second one is to distribute throughout the curriculum these issues. So I think it's interesting to look at how we address this in our own practice. I've looked in our program of study. We have 163 courses offering to our students. They don't have to take all of them. It's just most of them are elective, but it's a lot of covering a broad spectrum of technologies and theoretical subjects. Not a single one of them is relating to professional responsibilities and ethics. We found a few topics in an introductory to computing course, but that's all. And I also looked into the curriculum of National Kapodistrian University program in computer science and telecommunications, and they offer over 93, I think, courses. They do have one on legal informatics, which is more or less the approach, the first approach, out of 93 subjects. So, and I think across the world, more or less, the situation is very similar. Very little attention is put in professional responsibility and ethical issues. Now, it's a very interesting survey on this aspect is by Fissler et al. It's quite recent. They surveyed ethics-related courses in over 90, mostly US universities. And it's interesting the recommendation they come out with that in the conclusions of the paper. They say that issues such as bias and fairness touch on human and social aspects, and thus track directly to courses like design, human-computer interaction, research methods, cybersecurity, software engineering, while also courses on algorithms, data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence are also heavily implicated in tech ethics content. So this is obviously a recommendation to take the second approach and include social responsibility and ethical issues throughout the curriculum in various subjects, which resonates more or less to what was my second recommendation. They should bring the user perspective in various fields, various topics of our programs, and this should also include the social responsibility and ethics. The last thing I would like to make a reference and conclude my talk here is that we should also include ethics aspects in our own courses. It's an interesting set of papers by Gray et al. In CHI, most recent one in 2019, where they did an ethnographic study on the ethical issues of UX practitioners. They discussed with them many groups of practitioners, and they brought up the major issues relating to their work. We do know that ethical issues relate, for instance, to consent of our users when we run a user study. It's more complicated than just signing a piece of paper. How we get consent from a minor for a child? Or how do we get consent from a person with serious impairments who is not in a position to give us consent? How do we work? How do we evaluate systems with these guys? Now, also in Gray's work, there is a lot of interesting discussion on the conflicts between business goals and designers' view. Now, it was in the public media, the discussion about whether it should tolerate hate speech in Facebook, while the company, as it was revealed, said why not, because it increases the click stream, so the profits. So this kind of discussion, but perhaps a designer would say, no, that's not ethical, we shouldn't do this. And the business would say, no, that's to the interest of our organization to continue doing this. Also, selection of design methods like doing user research might have implication on ethical concerns. So these are all very important topics to discuss in our interactive design courses. Now, I think this is the end of my talk. Very briefly, as a summary, this is a very important time. Things are moving, and the new role brings new responsibilities. And we have here a few ideas mostly from our own experience, but also from the literature, how we make an impact, we make a contribution as HCI professional in the wider field. Thank you very much for your attention.